Welcome back to another exclusive conversation only on Janesville Community Page. This is Yuri Rashkin with Discover Community Media, and joining me today is Tom Breu, who is running for Congress against Congressman Paul Ryan. Tom, how are you?
Good. Thanks, Yuri, for being here today.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for being willing to sit down and discuss and answer the questions that have been submitted to Janesville Community Page. Let's start right at the top, and I guess Facebook is the one that determines in what order we see the questions. So first question comes from Kevin Wiskia, and he's got actually two questions. First question is, a huge part of your platform seems to be based on your opposition of the GOP and Ryan. Why did you decide to take an aggressive stance rather than focusing more on the issues?
I think there's a couple ways to answer that, but the only reason I got involved in politics 10 years ago was Paul Ryan. And it was at his debate with Dean Baker on privatizing Social Security. That was the spark that got it all started. Ever since then, it's just been growing. So I didn't join this to save the world or to have good ideas to move the country forward. I think I have a lot better ideas than Paul Ryan, but that's not what started it all. In fact, I remember the first meeting I went to after I announced, someone in the audience said, whatever you do, don't go negative. And I kind of struggle with that because the only reason I'm in the race is because Paul Ryan is so wrong in so many areas that, how can I not talk about that? Because that's the only reason I'm in here. So, it's been brought up a couple times, and nobody likes to go negative, I guess, but that's the only reason I'm in the race. Now, I do have positive ideas. If you go to the website, the HEHAW acronym. What are the four biggest topics that I pulled out? HEHAW, H is for healthcare, universal coverage. First E, education, free 2 years after high school. E, energy, raise the federal gas tax. That's he, and HAW, H-A-W, hammer at Wall Street. The biggest issue is money. Too much money in politics, which translates to too much power for those who have the money. So those are ideas, and those are very important. But again, it's tough not to be negative against Paul Ryan because that's the only reason I'm in the race.
All right. Kevin had a second question as well. Would you consider publicizing your campaign in a more national manner? While you are running for the 1st District, a large percentage of the nation is not a fan of Ryan since his 2012 run for vice president. National coverage could incite more interest at a local level.
Yes, and I am, and that's partly thanks to Paul Ryan. I mean, his elevation to Speaker of the House, for example, has led to Breitbart.com contacting me, I sat down with Matthew Boyle for an hour and a half yesterday, and we went over a number of issues. So Paul Ryan is a very big target. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. So a week or so ago, I got a donation from some guy in Massachusetts for $15. So there definitely is advantage to taking them on nationally for that reason. And, their question later down, I see something about, money and finance. And that $15 will pay for gas for a trip back and forth to Muskego next week kind of thing. So absolutely getting it nationally means you have, like you put it here, it generates more interest, and every time that funnels down to the local in whatever manner, that's a good thing. Let's have the discussion, the more the merrier, and absolutely.
All right. We have next question from Robert Frank Natz. Robert is asking, how are you financing your campaign?
Like the Donald, it's self-financing. The first year, certainly, the startup costs, the hearse and the car art on it, those were the two major expenses. After that, now it's gasoline and, yard signs and bumper stickers and all that. So, yeah, the first year, that was the plan all along. It'd be primarily self-funding. But this next year, certainly as it gets closer to the election, there's more involvement. Naturally, people get more involved. So,
when you say that independently financed, is it self-financed? Is it because you're independently wealthy?
Well, that's kind of a no. I'm not independent. Well, independent wealthy. I guess it depends what you mean. But my wife and I have been playing this for a long time, and after I convinced her that I wasn't crazy on this, and she's been my biggest supporter. For example, my wife Sylvia, went back to school a couple of years at Black Hawk Tech, and she graduated, and she is now working as a physical therapist assistant, bringing in dollars for these 2 years. So, yeah, we're going to have enough to make it through these 2 years, and she's been a great supporter. And one other thing I got to throw in is that, and we joke about it, my wife, and is that if I hadn't got into this at all, instead of having a hearse, we'd probably have a bass boat. But we've been planning this for a long time. It's important. I left my job I quit for 2 years, and we are living off of savings, absolutely. But if it's important enough, and it is, that's why I felt I needed to do it, is that Paul Ryan is so wrong. We're definitely hurt. We're living off of savings, but my wife's back to work, and we're going to make this work.
All right. Scott Schabel is asking a constitutional question. He says, what is your stance/viewpoints on Supreme Court decisions on constitutional rights, first, second, etc.?
Mm-hmm. Well, again, like the hee-haw hammer at Wall Street, Citizens United, and that corporations are people and money is speech, that's completely wrong. That's just a wrong interpretation. And, in fact, I do a lot of reading, and here's a book that Yuri can see, but by former Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens, Six Amendments, where he makes a strong case for a number of changes. One of them is Citizens United. I mean, it's a one sentence.
You taking out another book?
Well, yeah. So again, something I always keep in my pocket every time I'm out campaigning is a copy of the Constitution. And this is was that Huckabee or somebody who had that 4 or 5 years ago? It came out that's what he always did when he was driving around. And this is a case where I don't have all the numbers memorized and all that, but the Second Amendment gun rights, it's exactly one sentence: a well-regulated militia. So, being necessary to secure the free state. So the people who are pro-gun rights, they quote the second half, the right of the people to bear arms. But they kind of ignore the whole first half of that sentence, and the sentence is the fundamental unit of meaning. So one of the
you mean it doesn't say a bunch of vigilantes, it says a well-regulated militia?
That's right.
Interesting.
And you can see right here, it's exactly one sentence.
All right.
So they're splitting that sentence in half and missing that well-regulated militia. Well, this, again, remember, was written in 1787 or 1789. So the world was very different back then. So in general, and we can get into more specifics, but in general, the Constitution is not cast in stone. It needs to be changed. And I think a lot of people for example, the 3/5 clause, right? How 5 black people equal 3 white people if you're in the South, and that's how it got through. Well, that was eliminated with the 13th, 14th, or 15th Amendment, the slave amendments. So very few people would say that the Constitution, as originally written, and the 3/5 clause was how it should be. Well, it got changed because times changed. So the original question is, what do I feel about the Constitution? It is
and
a living
Supreme
document.
Court decisions.
Well, and the Supreme Court decisions relate to the Constitution. So, and nowadays,
this could be a one long conversation all by itself. So I think let's hope that Mr. Schabel feels somewhat satisfied or satisfied.
Touch of it. Yeah, you got a touch of it.
He's got a touch of it. All right, got a flavor. Thomas Speth writes, "Why are you wasting your time?" I can't really, it's a very brief question. But essentially, you're running against Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Sure, and I get that question a fair amount, like where I stand, especially on the Republican side. When you feel strongly enough about something, it doesn't really matter what your odds are of winning. So is Thomas Speth here saying that, well, if I had a 74% chance of winning on whatever poll, or 28%, at what point? Because you're never guaranteed a victory. The Cubbies, could they have won the World Series this year? Well, that's a long shot, but they made it to the playoffs. So am I wasting my time? Again, if you believe in something strongly enough, the odds of winning doesn't really matter. It's what needs to be done. And I guess one other way, a slightly different way to answer it is if you go back to how I describe myself, sure, I'm running as a Democrat, but I get the question, well, you're liberal or progressive. And labels can be a very constricting kind of a thing. So to answer that question, I'm a Roman Stoic meliorist. And to the Roman Stoics, if you think back the Roman Empire, the 1,000 years of the Roman Empire, when you think of Roman Stoicism, what made the Roman Empire a big part of it, what made them great, was that they fought their battles because it was the right thing to do, not because they were going to win. So that kind of Stoic attitude that you have to do what you have to do is a big part of why I'm running. So I know it's a long shot, but and then one final thing I have to throw in here is not just about me beating Paul Ryan. It's about all of us beating Paul Ryan and his like-minded friends. So I know Scotty Walker isn't up this election, but Robin Voss and all the other Republicans in the Wisconsin legislature, they are up for a re-election. So the more of those like-minded friends, and they are all, I certainly believe that everything is related, that if we toss out 2 or 3 or 4 or more of them, it's all part of the overall pendulum swing back to sanity, I guess.
All right. Rhonda Humiller asks, what is your take on Social Security and Medicare? We all know Ryan wants to cut both and privatize them.
Well, the first part there on Social Security, that is the one single reason why I got into politics in the first place. A little technical something here. But
yes, that's right.
We'll keep going, or if you want to start
keep
over.
going. Yeah, go ahead.
It's Social Security. Again, if you go to my website and look around, but the spark was August of 2005. So just over 10 years ago, I attended, strictly by accident, Paul Ryan debating Dean Baker on privatizing Social Security. And how that came about, which I think is kind of interesting, at least to me, is that one of our kids was involved in Boy Scouts. He did eventually get the Eagle Scout. Well, he was working on his Citizenship in the Nation merit badge. David is our kid's name. And if you're familiar with the Boy Scouts, you got to check off 5 or 6 items, and you get them, and then you do a little paperwork and get the merit badge. Well, one of his items was attend a political event. So somehow I got, flipped the coin with the wife or whatever, but I took Dave to that event, which was Paul Ryan debating Dean Baker on privatizing Social Security. So prior to that, I was a very low information voter. We have 7 kids and work, and, life gets in the way. But by attending that was the spark. And I remember walking back to the car afterwards and saying to myself, what's this Paul Ryan his head is just on crooked. He looks at everything the wrong way. He's just bad. His statistics, he views Social Security as an insurance program. And he's talking about, well, my rate of return isn't high. And then he conflates, it's an overall insurance thing. He talks about his kids. Well, if his kids live to be however years old, but if you die the day before you retire, well, you don't get any Social Security. And if you live to be 120, you get a lot of Social Security. So, he conflates microeconomics and macroeconomics. He just does so many things that are so wrong for his viewpoint that, like I said, that's what got me started. So your question, well, what is my take on Social Security? It's definitely not to be privatized. It's a social insurance program. It's a commitment from the government to take care of so many people in their retirement ages. So again, right, we don't need to go into, there's more on my website, and, give me a call or shoot me an email and we can talk for an hour on this. But Social Security, again, if Dean Baker was saying, it's what the real problem with it is the politicians who are throwing scare tactics out there. That's what we need to be afraid of. The program itself is working. It'll work for a lot of years. And it's real. One thing, let's lift the income cap on it, right? Right now, if it's like $110,000 or whatever, you make more than that, you don't pay anything above that. Well, that's pretty regressive. Just that one thing would extend it by 20 or 30 years. So there's a lot of ways to work to improve it. Privatizing it, sending it all to the stock market, that's going to make the people on Wall Street rich again. But someone who can't afford to send in a lot of money because they're working at minimum wage, they're not going to have any benefits that way because they're spending it day to day. They don't have the extra capital to send to Wall Street. So a lot of reasons why Ryan's wrong on Social Security, and Medicare is very similar in so many ways. The voucher, it's insane to think that the insurance companies are going to compete for business if you're a 80-year-old with 3 or 4 comorbidities. You got no money, you got a lot of sickness. They're not going to fight over you to get you to insure you because you're going to lose money on that one. So so many reasons. Definitely, he's wrong on the side of that one.
All right. We have next 4 questions, actually, from the same person, Victor Zeller. And so we'll conclude with those. So let's see, just making sure we're not missing anything else, as far as I can tell. So Victor Zeller's question number 1. You can win Rock County/Janesville. What are you doing to promote yourself in Racine, Kenosha, and the rest of the 1st Congressional District?
One of the first decisions I had to make 10 years ago when I decided, geez, Ryan is wrong. How can we work to get him?
So you've had this working in plan for 10 years.
Oh yeah, that was a spark way back then. And I remember and
you were saving, kind of, this was the plan that you and Sylvia made.
Well, again, that took some years all to finalize.
Okay, all right.
But no, my first letter.
That's when the spark is. Yeah.
But my first letter to the editor was like a few months after that.
Okay.
And I attended the Janesville leadership conference or something, and so I've been attending more and more things. That was like a year or so after, and I remember sitting there. Again, I wasn't looking at doing a local election. I said everything was like, Paul Ryan is wrong. That's why I'm here. So it's been a lot of years that I've been planning this. One of the first decisions I made. Again, I was not political at all. Well, I know I'm not a Republican because Paul Ryan is a Republican. So should I run as an independent or a Democrat? That was one of the first decisions I had to make. And what I came to pretty quickly, though, is that this is a 2-party system in our country. If you can win as an independent, but it's a lot harder than running as a Republican or Democrat. Just that's the way the system is set up. So how am I competing across the 1st Congressional District? Well, I chose a Democrat, not an independent, because this is a totally grassroots campaign. So there are, in each of the 6 counties in the 1st CD, there are Democratic parties of each of those counties. So I've been attending this past year all 6 county meetings. I've been to at least half a dozen of each one of them over this past year, and I continue to do that. So I'm developing friendships. I'm meeting people. These are people, like-minded people who say, we're here as Democrats because we're working for change. And so I am a Democrat. I'm running as a Democrat. And all those people that are out there when it comes to get out the vote, GOTV, get out the vote, they're going to be handing out literature for either Bernie or Hillary and for Russ Feingold. And hopefully they'll have my literature and they'll be able to hand that right out along with it or when they make the calls. And by knowing me as an individual, they will be able to say, who is this? They get the question, who is this guy? So, he's come to all of our meetings and I know him, he's a good guy and this and this and this. So they are my grassroots support network. And how am I reaching out across the 1st CD? Well, that certainly is a big part of it.
All right. Question 2 from Victor Zeller. A political campaign runs on dollars. Can you sustain the long run to Election Day 2016?
We've already touched on that. We've been planning it. My wife and I have been planning it for a long time. We've saved up for it. Now we're spending it. We're working on it. She's working. So, yeah, we can definitely make it. But I want to make a distinction here is that Zurban in 2012 raised over $1 million. And he was white because Paul Ryan can raise $1 million in one event if he wants to. He's got tons of money. This can't be about money. I don't have that money, right? He's got tons of money. So I'm not going to be spending millions of dollars on 30-second television commercials. I mean, it's a very different campaign. I can't, you can't beat Paul Ryan on money. So that's the other way. We're going grassroots, boots on the ground, ideas, issues, and pointing out his many failures. And again, donations are rolling in. I'll have enough for gas in the hearse, and that's where we'll go.
All right. So you pack your own lunch then?
Yeah. Yep.
All right.
But a lot of the stuff is, it's a couple hour drive. Okay. So I'm there and back, and I have to make supper tonight. But yeah, so that's another reason that, the CD is relatively compact. I can get back and forth. I sleep home every night. It's those costs are down.
Question 3, and this is kind of an inside baseball kind of a question to me. Do you believe that the Democratic Party is behind you, and will they run another candidate in the primaries?
2 different questions there. One is, I remember Mark Pienkos, who was the first congressional district Democratic chair for until a couple years ago, and he would be he would always say, or frequently say, that the party doesn't pick the candidate for the most part. The candidate has to want to do it. So the Democratic Party didn't pick me. They didn't encourage me. They didn't know, right? I just volunteered. It's something I felt I need to do. So, the Democratic Party, has to do what they have to do. At the state level anyway, they have a lot of fish to fry. They're way more concerned about Wisconsin Senate and Wisconsin Assembly races. Just spend a lot of effort recruiting in the 7 Wisconsin congressional districts. But they did put on their website, if you go to the WisDem's website, a couple of weeks ago, they did put a news release wishing me luck and how I'm, working hard, and we'll see. So I definitely. So
on the face of it, they appear supportive, and there's no other candidate that you're aware of. Right.
And again, I've met Martha Lanning, who is the Wisconsin chair of the Democratic Party, 7 or 8 times, more than that. Again, we've chatted a couple times. In fact, she wore at the last in Madison a month or so ago at Fighting Bob Fest. She walked by my table, and I gave her one of my campaign buttons, and she put it on. So I know Martha. 8 or 10 times we had a number of chats. I mean, she's got a lot on her plate, but like anybody else, it's still early. They're trying to wait and see. I don't know. We'll see.
All right.
But I think it'd be great. I think as I see it right now, the best thing to happen is if we had 2 or 3 more candidates in the Democratic first CD here against Paul Ryan, because I would then advocate for a debate every week from now until the election, all over the first congressional district. It could be big towns, small towns. It'd be all over. That would local media would have to cover it, which is a very hard thing to do as a grassroots candidate. Other than Yuri, I mean, it's just hard to get any kind of press time to debate these issues because I'm okay. So having those debates would have local press coverage. There'd be citizens who said, "Oh, I can, that's tomorrow night at the high school. I can get there." So there'd be local participation, people who just don't have a chance to meet the 1 or 2 debates that'll happen in a year. So you can get that kind of involvement from people who normally can't get involved. That's all.
So the same as what happened to you when you switched from a low information voter to somebody who cares about politics.
Yeah. Right. It was something local, that 10-minute drive, and there you go. So absolutely, that I told this to a number of Democratic county party meetings, and some people kind of stand back and say, "Well, that's a little bit odd," because nobody wants an opponent in a primary.
Right.
But again, if you think that I'm not doing this, I don't want to go through a uncontested primary and only get beat in the fall. I mean, this is about defeating Paul Ryan. So that's not where my ego's at. So if we can get a stronger candidate or a better candidate, but it would help me to sharpen up and focus my talking points, the crucible of the debate. So I would love for 2 or 3 more other candidates to announce, and let's start raising some discussions.
Okay. And then the final question, but also connected to the Democratic Party, from Victor Zeller. Do you feel the Democratic Party will support your campaign with enough enthusiasm to defeat Paul Ryan?
Oh, that's always a hard one to tell. I mean, it's back to that grassroots support, and the more you get to know the people, they're already at the point that they don't like Paul Ryan. So those kind of people already have the support of, and those are the grassroots support. That's to be determined. If we had an answer for that, that'd be golden. But that's the whole process of the campaign and debate.
All right. Tom Breu, candidate for 1st Congressional District, thank you so much for being on this exclusive conversation for Janesville Community Page. Thanks to all the JCP fans that have submitted questions. This is Yuri Rashkin, and you're listening to Discover Community Media.